Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast. Learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 3, where we will be talking to Carolyn Paraday and learn how she developed the mastery of writing as her craft. Carolyn is a semi-retired business professional turned author and blogger. You may be surprised to hear Carolyn writes nothing about business. Her fascination is with people's stories, and a passion for writing paired with a quest in spirituality has led her down an interesting and unexpected path. Her journey encompassed 2 yet-to-be-published narrative non-fiction books entitled God Quest, God Discovered in Everyday Places and Intimate Connections, God's Grace in Everyday Places. And she's the creator of her blog and website, Carolyn and Paraday, Stories That Bridge Heart and Heaven. Today, Carolyn shares the driving forces that propel her journey, the unexpected discoveries of her life's purpose, and how mastering the craft of writing was intrinsic to the purpose and the medium through which to deploy her purpose.
Well, thank you, Niranjan. I'm so excited to be here. I'm grateful for your invitation. It's a wonderful space to share my story. And I just want to apologize to you and your listeners. I'm a little hoarse today, so I just hope you can bear with me for a bit. But as you mentioned, Niranjan, I'm a semi-retired business professional. And leading up to my semi-retirement, my life was pretty much rolling along for a number of years, just as one would expect. I was, and I'm still married, and we have 2 children. We had, and we still have, a nice but modest home. And until a few years ago, I had a really good job, and I was at the top of my career. I had a faith life and attended church, and life was good. And I should have been completely satisfied. But ungrateful as it might sound, I wasn't. I was staring down the next 10 years of my life, sitting there, looking at that long-range view to retirement, and I'm asking myself, is this it? Somehow, the status quo, it no longer satisfied. And I wasn't just questioning my business career, but also my faith life. My relationship with God was good, but often it seemed separate from the daily comings and goings of my life, and church, like everything else, it became a routine. And I was restless. I wanted more. I longed for something that was alive, something that was dynamic, a deeper spiritual connection with God, and something that showed me that God was real, and in everything or not, but whatever it was, I needed to know either way. And I'm sitting there wondering, okay, is this just me? Am I the only one feeling this way? Is there anybody out there having similar kinds of thoughts and feelings?
Mm-hmm.
And the driving frustration, I had this powerful internal call to do something radical. But I was locked into, it was a 27-year career, and I've been with the same company, and there really wasn't a drastic way to change anything without forfeiting a whole lot. And then there was this not-so-subtle push that sent me tumbling over a cliff and towards unexpected answers. And it all started with, well, what can I say? It was, I think the word fired comes to mind, but it really wasn't like that. It was polite. It was a few words delivered across a boardroom table, and what they said to me was, well, we're closing your department. But really, there wasn't a definitive beginning to this journey. It's not like, when you have a runner and she's starting at the, that start line and she's preparing for the race of her life. If I'm really honest, the change in direction had started well before receiving my pink slip, and it was subtle, and it came in increments. It was like a slow fading of one life as the colors bled and then blended into the new. And I had no idea my spiritual restlessness would see me pursuing people's stories of discovering God in everyday places, and that would make me into a blog writer and an author, and then I would end up backwards in the book marketing process. And if you do your research, the literary authorities will tell you that what you should do is you start with a social media platform, you blog to build an audience, and then you write a book that people will love. And I did it all backwards. I wrote a book, and it turned into two, and then I created a blog.
But that's just the process of life, right? We don't always get it in that particular order on many occasions.
Yeah, it sure does shake things up as to what one might think is the natural order.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I have a question for you. What do you believe about yourself, and how does that define you for who you are with these experiences?
Wow. That's pretty loaded. I'm sure your listeners have already determined that when I'm speaking, I'm speaking from a faith-based perspective. But, I trust that, my experiences are human enough to resonate without any fear of religiosity stealing the show. So, I ask for your forbearance, Duranjan, and your listeners
Absolutely.
just to forbear the faith-based framing of my answers.
Of course.
Now, okay, getting back to your question. What do I believe about myself, and how does it find me? And I'll frame my answer with a quote from an American pastor, and his name's Chris Russell. And what Chris says is, God has created you to fulfill a specific role in this world, and there's no one who can achieve completely what God has purposely created you to do. Now, I've got to say, I've read and I've heard how God thinks we humans are special. But I always thought this was more like when you were a kid on your birthday. You feel the warmth of the attention of that day, you receive birthday presents and well wishes. Everyone makes a fuss and you feel good. It's your special day, right? Mm-hmm. And the next day, everything goes back to the way it was before. Mm-hmm. But Chris's statement floored me. I kind of knew we're all special in God's sight, but Chris's statement suggested something that was weighted, and it was meaty, and it was participatory. It wasn't a gentle, passive pat on the head with a whisper in our ear as to how special we are. Because what Chris is saying, he's saying that each of us is unique. And each of us, we each have a distinct purpose. And I believe this. But it's still a struggle to accept. Because of our unique place in the world, it means that to deploy our purpose, no one else can do the job for us. Nobody can stand in because our perspective is unique. It's one of a kind. It's irreplaceable, and there are no substitutions. And the implications are huge. And I'll suggest, Duranjan, that they could be a topic of a whole other podcast.
Yes.
But that's another story, and I'll leave that one for you.
Yes.
Yeah. So after realizing that each of us is unique, really the next item is it's our distinct purpose, right? And that's when the real work begins.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know about you, but it's taken me a long time to figure out and to find my purpose. And I got to say, it's still evolving. Mm-hmm. And it's especially about the part on how to translate my purpose into everyday living. Now, it might sound a bit obscure and maybe even hokey, but the reality is meteor, and I'll illustrate in a bit what I'm driving at here. But eventually, I discerned my purpose was to bridge. And you're probably sitting there in their engine saying, well, what the heck does she mean? So what I mean by that is to serve as a bridge from one heart and mind to another in many ways that are ultimately will connect our hearts to God. And let me try to illustrate what I'm getting at, because there are a lot of ways through which I fulfill my purpose that define me. For instance, 3 years ago, I was asked to assume the role of treasurer at my local church, and I'm still treasurer today. Initially, there was a learning curve, but I had enough sense to fill the knowledge gap. And my duties are to make sure the accounting entries land in the right buckets. I report on the monthly financials, and I assure we comply with CRA requirements, plus a bunch of other stuff. But my purpose is to serve as the communications bridge between what happens in the office and the church, community, and leadership. I explain the community's financial status in common language, from my heart and mind to theirs. That is my purpose. That is what defines me. In another example, unlike my role as treasurer, I'm paid to provide part-time administrative and event planning services to a client. And my client's a local chapter of a national adult educational institution. The chapter leadership gets run by volunteers, and most of them work full-time. So I bridge the gap between their ideas and initiatives by organizing and administering events. So I bring to action the desires and thoughts in their hearts and heads. I am their bridge, and that is my purpose, and that is what defines me. Now, closer to home. One of the reasons I work part-time is because of a really deep certitude that I must be available to care for my 89-year-old mother. Now, with a lot of support and in spite of her growing ailments, my mother still lives in her own house. But as she becomes more fragile, it's the small things that upset her, right? She used to be a nurse and a really good one. But now her cage gets easily rattled. She doesn't cope well with any hiccups in normal routines. And my purpose is to serve to bridge, as a bridge to secure her peace of mind. Whatever she needs or isn't sure of, she comes to me and I tell her, Mom, look, there's no need to worry. Leave it to me. I got to take care of things. So I provide a bridge from my heart and mind to hers to make her feel secure, safe, and loved is my purpose, and that's what defines me. And finally, it's the same way with my writing. The stories I gather and write about people are bridges, and they're offering glimpses into hearts and minds, and they're connecting one to another. And once a person shares their story, it becomes part of my story. That's my purpose. That is what defines me.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And what a blessing for others and yourself to be part of that story, to be the bridge of bringing these people's stories to light and to live a purpose to capture that. So that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Caroline. Thank you. And do you believe your writing is your call? Is that what you believe?
Well, Durangela, I believe God calls us to different things throughout our life. But there are some calls that are more distinct and pronounced. I want to say even that some calls are loud, but God doesn't generally shout at us. The challenge is in distinguishing a calling. How can you tell? For instance, I was asked to become treasurer at our church. But before I was asked, I had determined one day, when I had more time, I would step up to the plate. I had observed others that they were in the community and they were serving, and they had their time and talent and they were bringing it to the table. And it didn't seem right to me or fair that I was always the one in the pew benefiting without making a contribution. So I figured one day that it would have to be me, and I would need to do the same, right? Mm-hmm. And then I did. But was this a calling? Before providing admin and event planning services to my client, I was one of the volunteers. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was looking for work, and I'd often eyed that particular job, and I said, I bet I could do that. And the part-time nature of the work, it would have fit really nicely with my mom and trader duties, plus my writing. But as it was, there was already a young woman in the job, and she had small children, and she'd been doing the function for 11 years. So, it was wishful thinking on my part. And then she resigned. So I pitched for the job, and I caught it. Mm-hmm. But was this a calling? And what about the deep certitude that I must be available to care for my mother? Is this a calling? Mm-hmm. And writing, what about that? Now, what I'm going to suggest to you, Niranjan, is that maybe there are varying strengths and depths and maybe even varying lengths of times to calling. And I'll go a step further to say that maybe even the purpose of one calling might be to prepare for another that comes with a bigger load and a greater potential impact. Now, let me share with you what I've discovered about calling so far. And calling clue number one. Mm-hmm. Pay attention to the wiring. So knowing our own leanings, and those are the things we gravitate towards that are natural, that's our first clue. So it's really important to pay attention to our internal wiring. Mm-hmm. Now, for me, when I think back, I place my first stirrings to write, and I see myself in my head at a small desk in a small room in my childhood home. And my mother hadn't seen me in a number of hours, so she knocks on my door just to see what I'm up to, and she asked me, well, what was I doing? So I told her I was writing a story, and I'd been so captivated with Disney's book, The Swiss Family Robinson, and their tropical island adventures that, being quite young and not knowing the magnitude of the job, I, ambitiously decided to write my own book. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, beautiful. And then I asked her, okay, I said, Mom, do you want to hear what I've written? Mm-hmm. What I remember most was my mom's smile after she read my scribblings and her comment, it sounds a bit like the book you were reading. But it was a start to my love of words and stories. And clearly the preliminary wiring was in place.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, another signal to a calling is it's when Niranjan others affirm our gifts even before we recognize them. In their minds, it's not clouded by self-doubt or insecurity or any kind of made-up excuses. It's easier for others to see God moving in us than it is for us to see God moving in ourselves. So our call is affirmed before we realize something is actually evolving. And over the years, I would always be really surprised when people would make comments to me and they'd say, I love how you write, you express yourself so well. Or somebody else would say, geez, I can't write my ideas down like you do. Or even if I delivered a program, great workshop, great content, you delivered it just like a teacher. I was always shocked. I was surprised. Sure, it pleased to praise. I was pleased with the praise, but I was uncomfortable in my own skin. I was embarrassed. And all I knew was I liked to write and communicate with people. I liked it a lot. And I found a quiet joy in assembling ideas and massaging language. My hope was to do it well and create a flow of meaningful words that would engage the reader, maybe sometimes entertain, but mostly it was to communicate clearly ideas and bring some kind of benefit to the exchange. Beautiful. But I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell if I did it well or not, or if I was compelling or informative or educational or anything else for that matter. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got to tell you, Niranjan, self-doubt, was a foe I wrestled. And believe me, we fought over my meager literary training and the caliber of my writing skills. Finally, I got that beast in a headlock, and I determined God was calling me to write, and seriously write.
Yeah.
And my purpose wasn't clear, or to what end, but after thinking about it for a while, it seemed God was telling me not to concern myself with the results. Simply put, my job was to write. And it would be for others to judge the results, not me. And I remembered a friend whispered in my ear, do it now. Don't wait. Write the book.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's so interesting how we have often see or look for either a confirmation or a little push of encouragement from others to affirm that we are on the right path, that we need that little bit more of drive to move us forward, because following our own path so succinctly is courageous and very challenging.
Yeah, and I think people are put there, as I said, they see our gifts before even we see them.
Often the case, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is brings us back to that element of self-doubt, right? Because we don't see it within ourselves, we see it in others.
Yeah.
But that takes time to come over that and overcome that, should I say?
Yes.
To be able to fully own that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let me tell you about calling clue number 3. And when God calls us, there's generally time of preparation. There's a building up of needed resources and the provisioning of preliminary tools. At least you get enough to get you going, right? Several years before I was handed my pink slip, I had started on a journey to better myself, and I've met my business credentials. So what I was doing in my off hours, I was pursuing a professional designation.
Right.
And after a really humbling failure of one of my assignments that really put the whole course at risk, I managed a last-minute rally, but it was enough of a toll to push me through to the end. So you can imagine the shock when receiving news of an award for securing the highest mark in Canada for business communications.
That's wonderful.
It was astounding. It was the first of many provisionings, but it was the one that boosted confidence in my ability, and it gave me courage in doubtful moments.
Yeah. And I think it's also an element of intention. When you are often challenged in a certain situation or circumstance, and you have that intention to really drive forward to push through and live out that intention completely, adds another element to your own mental wiring process of what the outlook of that is.
Yeah. Well, definitely there are often things that are put in front of you that are preparing you for that call. And I've often overheard the minister at my church say, that you need to do the things that give you energy. And this also is one hallmark of a calling. And I think that's a really useful benchmark. We can't fulfill our unique purpose if we don't have enough energy, if we're drained. And what we're called to do, it's meant to bring life. It's meant to bring life to others, and it's meant to bring life to ourselves. But how do you know when God calls you to something that it's not just fanciful thinking, right? How do you know it's not your imagination playing with your head, or maybe you want to scratch another item from your bucket list? for me, the sign is a quiet yet persistent idea, and it simply won't go away. Even after years, even after distractions and other preoccupying busyness. Now, having said that, I hesitate because even that description seems inadequate. Maybe even it's an understatement.
Mm-hmm.
Because a call is more than just a notion. It's something you just can't shake. It's a magnet pulling your soul. It's a subtle grip that gently but inevitably draws you forward.
Right.
And out of all the things God has called me to do, caring for my mother and writing score the highest in each of the calling clues categories. There's a seamless alignment of heart and mind to purpose. When I care for my mother, it's as natural as breathing, and there's no burden. I'm compelled to wrap her in love. Now, don't get me wrong, Ranjan. There are difficult days, like when she slipped on the ice and broke her knee.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't believe after the hospital visit you would have been impressed at the logistical machinations of getting her out of the car and into the house with a 500-pound temporary cast on her leg.
Hmm.
And I don't think I mentioned the convalescence after her hip surgery.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. But there was no other place I could have been except with her during those times. My heart synchronized to her and to God and to my purpose, to bridge love. And when I write, it's as if God dangles in front of me these threads of thought, and I grasp one, and then I reach for another, and little by little bridge one thought to the other, and each is unique. But when they're melded to the next, it amplifies the whole, and it transforms to something bigger than when it stood alone. It's a seamless alignment of heart and mind to purpose.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love how we've brought all those pieces together. So I guess needless to say, writing is a calling in your life, right, Carolyn?
Yeah, I'm very much so.
It's beautiful. So where do you see it going? What is your intentions with your craft?
Well, Ranja, I really want to get my books published, and I need to secure representation with a literary agent. My efforts in that area were curtailed for a long time because I had to stop to make some money.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll be shortly stepping back from the treasurer role I was talking about, so I will have time again.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Carolyn, this has been such a pleasure and such an honor hearing about your journey, and really for you to share so succinctly the key factors and the key areas of how, in retrospect, you have been able to connect the dots of what challenges you've had to face, and some of the skills, talents, and tools that we have that just come with ease. And often how they come with ease, we forget that they are with ease. And that really truly defines us, who we are as human beings and what we're supposed to do here in this lifetime. I wish you so much luck and so much abundance on your journey to publishing these books and staying in alignment with your true path of your purpose of what you're here to do, is bridging those stories, bringing these people together and putting light, and I guess really sharing light, love and compassion in all forms and shapes and ways that you do in your life. So I thank you so much, Carolyn, for sharing those stories.
Well, thank you, Naranj, and to your listeners, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I look forward to next time. Thank you. I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.